Hey,
Hey,
alrighty. Just I actually don't know if anyone's going to be joining us today, or is this going to be you and me? But either way, it doesn't matter. It's going to be cool.
here's hoping. I haven't done one of these for a while, and this specific one has been requested for like 3 months, and I just kept not getting to it, and I feel bad Full disclosure, I don't do a lot of endurance.
Nah,
So I feel kind of guilty. And I was like, yeah, all right, fine. I know I said I do it. Okay, fine, I'm doing it. So the illustrious host Franco
well,
is
here's the
back.
thing. And based on the questions that all right. Are we live? Yes, we are live.
Yes,
all
we
right.
are,
So
yes.
welcome everyone. If anyone who is here live right now is here early, because this is going to start at 8:30. So we're still gonna give a couple of minutes before we go deep into the nuts and bolts of what we're talking about today, which is going to be endurance and all of these things that have to do with long treks, things that are out of the normal situation. What happens when you go too high in the atmosphere? What happens when you go too low into the water? All of those sort of situations. Preferably, we're talking about, in general terms, D&D 5th edition, but as you know, no one system has rules for absolutely everything, and a lot is left to DM Fiat anyway, so we're going to be touching on those things. So if you're with us, thanks for joining us. If you're watching this later on, thanks for tuning in. It's going to be a lot of good stuff. We took all the questions directly from the people who were interested in these subjects. So if your question was not answered, leave it in the comments. I'm sure Jay will find some time at some point to get those answers.
I will get to it. Did you have a question you wanted to start with?
You will. So here's the thing. There's a thing about world building that is normally left 100% in the hands of the dungeon master. But I do know that you leave a lot of world building to your players, which is, I think, very cool. I think it's the way to go. However, there are things that players expect you to have the answer to. And generally, how the physics of your universe work is one of those things. At least that's the expectation. Because unless you correct them like, oh, well, yeah, you know, you walk over the chasm, but you don't fall, they're going to assume that it's not because the physics work that way. They're going to assume that there's something weird in play. So unless you clarify that the physics of your universe are different, players will naturally, and I think rightfully so, assume that you know why.
Right. If I think that goes down to
and that's a little bit about the thing here.
Yeah, I think that comes down to player understanding. You as Franco are only out of the box familiar with the physics of, well, Earth. So you have a fundamental understanding of gravity because you're subject to it, which is to say if you walk over a chasm, you'll fall. So I think as humans, we have a starting point that we'll just assume unless somebody tells us otherwise. Like, unless you go out of your way to tell me that the fire in this world we've made up does not burn me, I'm going to assume that it will without any further understanding. I'm also probably going to assume that it's red-ish.
Right. Yes, you see flames engulfing the creature. No one imagines purple flames unless someone says they were purple flames engulfing the creature.
Right. If you say the flame engulfs the creature, I assume that it is in danger and not being smothered in rabbit kisses or something like that.
Which again depends on the universe.
Right.
And that's a very interesting thing. In the end, every universe or every setting, I guess is what we would call them in D&D at least, is unique. But one of the things that every source book will ever tell you is feel free to use this as you wish and as much of it as you wish and leave as much of it as you want on the table. So I've yet to see at least, and I know that you have your own issues with the Wizards of the Coast, but at least the publications from Wizards of the Coast that I've seen will always have that little disclaimer saying, hey, you do you.
Right. I tend to call...
How are we doing on time? All right, 8:29 for those of you that are...
Excellent. I tend to call Wizards of the Coast, particularly their most recently 5e, because that's the most recent edition, and the Forgotten Realms base setting within that, I tend to call that Wizards of the Coast prime example, which is to say you can play however you want. Here's the starting template we've provided you with. Should you not have the energy or the drive or the desire or just the time to change it. It is a $50 book.
Absolutely.
We'd like you to be able to play right now.
Believe it or not, as I was looking through a couple of things about D&D and about other role-playing games, and even though D&D is on the higher end of the spectrum as far as price goes for some of its published materials, it is not the most expensive.
It sure isn't.
It's also not the least expensive. Let me just.
What have I got around here? This, granted, this came in a fancy slipcover, but this was more expensive than the 5e book for sure.
I'm assuming licensing has to do with that because John Carter of Mars.
Yeah, there is
that one.
Yeah.
Because I believe, licensing will do that to the price. It will shoot it up. All right, it's 8:30 p.m. Welcome everyone who's here live, and if you're seeing this later on, thank you for joining us. I'm here with the awesome Jay Kennedy, who is one of the professional dungeon masters that has graced us in our group. At least this all started as a Facebook group, but has graced us with a lot of experience that he has. And today we're actually going to tackle a couple of questions about endurance, about what to do with elemental hazards, what happens on long treks, what happens when you get shot into space, what happens when you get plunged into a lot of water other than breathing otherwise. So all of those things, how to handle these extraordinary situations, which normally don't go into a general combat encounter, how to do these kind of elemental hazards, how to do these ambient risks. Now, I am going to part with the only thing that I know, which is I am really well versed in D&D 5e. However, I am going to have to defer to our host today, which is Jay Kennedy, who is a lot better versed in other systems. So, Jay, without further ado, I think...
Do you know that I can no longer hear you?
Oh, there we go.
You were saying? You were like, and Jay, gone.
And Jay, so I want to kick you off with a question just to kind of, it's a softball question, and it was the first question that we got. Okay. And here goes. And as far as a human-like creature, so we're going to say something about human size, anything from a halfling to an orc, I guess. Okay. Barring the need to breathe, how long or how deep can they dive into water before it starts to harm them, kill them, or otherwise, just because of the pressure? So that's a question we get. It's simply because, yes, assuming, let's say they have water breathing, let's assume that breathing is not the problem, but a human-like creature, a land-dwelling creature, which is our general default for at least 5e.
Yeah.
How far can we go before this becomes a problem? How do you rule these things?
Well, full disclosure, unless as with probably every question that's going to come up here, I'm not going to, as a general rule, I'm not going to care unless it matters, which is to say, if you ended up underwater and I'm having you roll to see if you swim as opposed to drown, that's the same thing as a save or die trap. So if you fail the save, you're not going to drown. Something bad's going to happen to you, but you're not going to drown. Like that's absurd. But on a very straight up mechanical level, at around 100 feet, you'll have 4 times the normal pressure you have on you when you walk around. Which is to say, for about every 33 feet, a diver descends. The weight of the water above them increases by 15 pounds per square inch, if you want to get hyperactively realistic about it. Which is to say, going down not that far will start to hurt you quickly. It will be uncomfortable. It won't necessarily hurt you. But I mean, I wouldn't get all that realistic about it.
No. Well, here's the thing about realism. No matter what system you choose, they're in the end a simulation. And I don't know if you are a big fan of these little YouTube videos about D&D, but someone, I believe it was the name Kyle, put in a video recently about surviving within the bag of holding. How long could you actually breathe? And it doesn't really match up.
That.
Yep. And it doesn't really match up to the 10 minutes described in the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Well, of course, I'm a big fan of Kyle's work. I love his channel. He just recently redid a video on how come you should not, do not do it, wear weighted clothing like Goku does. Good call.
Correct. Love that one too, which has to do a lot with endurance, which we're going to touch on a little bit later on, because I'm going to say full plate armor is the equivalent of weighted clothing to a certain degree. Well, here's the thing about this. Now, you can never truly simulate the real world, otherwise you wouldn't be playing D&D. you would have to have calculators out, you'd have to do something else entirely, and it would take longer to calculate the real world consequences of things than it would to actually just go out and do the thing. So the offhand solution that I've always found is treating it as a puzzle. Can this land-dwelling creature, if assuming it does have water breathing, finish whatever task it is he has to do without having to worry about the water pressure? Or am I including that as one of the challenges that they have to get around? They have to find a solution because I'm telling them up front, hey, this is so deep that the water pressure will crush you, lest you find another solution. And that's kind of the workaround that I have found. I hand wave a lot of it if it's just a flavor thing. They have to go deep into a cavern, swim a couple of feet underwater, and then come up for air in a cavern, which you can do. Well, the challenge there is not breathing. So if we're saying, well, what if they can breathe? What about the pressure? Then I would personally, this is what I do, is I introduce that up front as part of the challenge. And
Agreed.
then based on that, I'm saying, well, this is an additional complication that you have to resolve for. Otherwise, you just can't go. So you start to go deep, but you feel the urge to come back up because you have no way to stand this pressure.
See, I was with you there until right at the end. There's a nuance there, sure. The difference between you feel panicked, so you want to go up, is different than I've essentially told you that you're afraid, because one is in theory psychological and the other is in theory biological. Your body just craves air and will panic and attempt to get to said air. But that's from a personal, like how I feel perspective, that's not actually all that different than when you're in a crowded space with 50 people that you don't know, and that's not a good time. And I want to be anywhere other than right here. I'll climb out a window if it wasn't so socially unacceptable that my wife would give me a hard time over it. So the difference there in how a person actually feels is not different enough for me to be okay with it. So I would handle that a tiny bit differently. I would say I would put everything up front, like you said, like, hey, look, these are the challenge components. There's a chest you can see. You decide you want it. You can see it because it glows from 100 feet down. That's weird.
Sure.
Of course you want it, right? It's a glowing chest. Of course you want it. You're going to go get it. You need to swim down there, pick the lock, and do it before the pressure starts to get to you. I'm going to roll a d4. Or actually, I'm going to have a player roll it. Agency, they're going to roll a d4. That's how many rounds you've got, starting as soon as you touch the water. If they roll the 1, they can say, nah, it ain't worth it. But I'm not going to let them re-roll the die without changing something about their situation. Because that's not that different than taking 20 on a skill check, which is something you should just I tend to just let them do if there's no pressure. If the chest isn't moving, if a fish isn't trying to pull away with it, if they're not under attack, right? If there's nothing that's going to change the situation, then why roll? You take an hour, you ready yourself, you go get the chest, you're done. But if they want to get it while they're under attack, or I don't know, it's on the back of a giant eel that's swimming underneath, and if they don't go get it now, it's going to be who knows where in the ocean, then yeah, roll the d4, off you go. And then we rolls like normal. And if you don't pass in the allotted time described to you by the D4, we figure out what that means. Like maybe you took damage, maybe you broke your lock off in the chest, but you're otherwise fine. You just don't get the goodies. Maybe the eel slaps you with its ass. Who knows?
All right. Now I'm going to throw a little bit of wrench into your situation there. Now, as you know, we have slightly differing styles for DMing. You are I'm a much more tactical DM, simply because that's what I like. There's no better than the other one.
Oh, no, certainly not.
So here's the way that I would handle this sort of situation. By levels of submersion, you get certain conditions lest you beat a difficulty class roll. Now, again, I'm gonna go out and say this is 5e compatible, but you can use this method that I'm saying no matter what system you're using, because we're literally homebrewing what happens. There's nothing in it that I've ever come across. So I'm going to refer to page 290 of the player's handbook, which is all the conditions.
Oh, always pulling out books now. Oh, look at you.
Well, here's the thing. The questions were, how do you handle this?
Yeah,
and I'm like,
yeah,
you know what? Most of the people in our group will at least have these two books. So these are the ones I'm referring to. So, for example, I'm just going to read out the frightened condition. Frightened creature has an advantage on ability checks while the source of its fear is within sight, and the creature can't willingly move closer to the source of its fear. So I would say that, let's say that you start feeling the pressure at, I'm going to throw a number out there. I'm going to say that 50 feet is when you actually start at least feeling the symptoms of this. So I'm going to say, okay, to get past these 50 feet, your body can take it, but your mind starts to falter. Roll me an intelligence save. See if you can identify that fear that you're feeling is something you can overcome. If they do, fantastic, they can willingly move further down. Otherwise, they are frightened, which also means that if they're at that depth and a different creature just randomly attacks them, they still have all the conditions of being frightened, which is disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls. So it does form part of the puzzle. But let's say they overcome it. They do go further down. Fantastic. I'm going to add another 10 feet and say, after this, you start feeling restrained, which is the pressure is enough that you can't move well, lest you beat a strength save. All right. If you do not beat the strength save, a restrained creature's speed becomes 0. You are under so much pressure that you can't willingly move. They have to save you. Because again, that's part of it. And attack rolls against you have advantage. And of course, your attacks have disadvantage, and you have disadvantage on anything that's related to dexterity. So here's the thing. I'm imagining a virtual, a kind of a vertical grid instead of a horizontal one as normally. If you go this far down, you have to beat this check. Otherwise, you're going back up because you're afraid. You beat your fear, you go back down, you have to beat this check. Otherwise, you're just not strong enough to force yourself down.
What's interesting to me here is that you as opposed to just setting the DC higher at a more impressive, I was going to say in theory, but not in theory, in cold hard fact, 50 feet underwater is an easier game than 80 feet underwater. You didn't change the DC. You didn't say this is essentially a harder door lock, which it basically is. Instead, you said different skill check, which is interesting.
Correct.
I think in this case, I would have just I would have done wisdom instead of intelligence, mostly because your emotions are not intellectual. How you feel is not how you think. They almost never are. They're two completely different things. And I can absolutely rationalize that the way I'm feeling makes no sense. And I'm going to feel that way anyway in perfectly normal situations.
Absolutely correct. Now, the reason is what check you want to use is a little bit of DMC on that one. I'm doing the ones that make sense to me because there's no will save. You do have the will to do this, but at least in D&D 5e. Now,
there's no will save, right? Generally, I would pass that to the player because I like intent. If Spider-Man whips a dagger at you like this, right? For some reason, Spider-Man has a dagger, and he throws a bunch of them at you. And I promise he made that with his Dex modifier. If Conan does the same thing, I promise he did it with his strength modifier, right? And that comes down to individual character intent. I know what you're doing. How are you doing it? And I think you can apply that same question to feats of the mind.
Sure, absolutely so. Now, and again, this is because you and I run a slightly different game. So what I end up doing is that I set up a recurring method to resolve things that's always the same so that my players in the future can plan accordingly.
Okay.
So they don't get to say, well, this time it was my will, or this time it was my wisdom, next time it's my intelligence. Like, nope, this part is going to be an intelligence check no matter who you are. This part's going to be a strength check no matter who you are because, and again, I run a much more tactical game. In the future, when you have this again, now you can plan for it. Maybe your cleric is going to give you a blessing, and your bard is going to give you bardic inspiration so that you can do this, and so then you can apply those on those checks. And
I would hand that to the player and say, hey, instead, when I host, the players know that they can use, in almost every case, they can use the thing, the skill, the stat, whatever, that they want to, assuming they can come up with some reasonably shoehornable reason how come they can do that. And usually it's not that difficult. But
It
the
definitely is.
cleric bless and the bardic inspiration, you can apply those to any number you want. So
True.
when the player who goes, well, Jay lets me use my strength score all the time. Hey, bless my strength score, would you? Right? So they still get to plan ahead, but they get to plan their way, as opposed to having to adapt to the plan framework that I hand them.
True. True. Now, and again, this comes to different styles of DMing,
Oh, yeah.
which
Yeah,
this
yeah.
one is right on. I very much like to set up a universe that's as predictable as possible,
Yeah.
so that my players will always know if this situation comes up, it's always going to be handled this way. So let me plan for it, instead of the situation came up again, but I get a new way to plan for it, and I'm going to waste half an hour coming up with a new idea. Like, no, we went through this before. This is how we're handling it.
Right.
So that, and again, that comes to different ways.
Right.
Now, I do believe, though, that it comes down to puzzle solving. These things are actually only relevant if the adventure you're on requires you to overcome this.
Agreed. One of these days, we'll have to talk about how come I think every encounter ever is some avenue of a puzzle. Whether it's a giant chess game, you're fighting a bunch of goblins, you're picking the lock. That classic thing where the walls are coming in, they're going to crush you into jelly with the spikes if you don't get out of here right now. Right? Those are all just puzzles.
Absolutely.
How do I get the tumblers to open and give me the thing inside before something bad happens is not that different than how do I drain the goblin's hit points to 0 before something bad happens.
True, and as a DM, you can always throw in a wrench anyway, so it doesn't matter if it's a goblin fight or otherwise. Absolutely. So it just comes down to predictability. And in my case, I like handing my players as predictable a set of universal rules as possible, which is why I sometimes are like, okay, well, what would actually happen? And I sit down, I reason through it. I would be, at this point, I'd be scared, but my body wouldn't be feeling it. That's a mind thing. At this point, I dominated my mind, I'm good with it, but now I actually start to feel the physical part. Now I need the strength check. And my players can disagree with me, by the way, and often they do. Like, hey, well, no, that would be different. In which case, I do allow a little bit of world building on their behalf. Well, how do you think it would be? Well, this would actually not be an intelligence thing. This might be a wisdom thing, like you said. Fine, we're going for it that way. But once we set that in, that is our home rule for these situations and how we handle them. So for those of you who asked, there's the two approaches. You can actually set up a home rule for it, or you can play it by scenario each time differently, depending on what they come up with. And there's nothing wrong with either method.
Agreed.
I don't know. I don't have anyone here who's ever played with me as a DM, so I don't know their experience, but I've gotten relatively good feedback. But I can tell you, I have played with Jay, and his way of handling these challenges is also tons of fun. So you do not have to be as structured as I generally am as a DM. Now, the opposite end of this question came along with it, and is, well, how about altitude? How high can that same creature, humanoid creature, go? And how quickly before they experience any sort of trouble, any sort of, air is thinning, or we're running out of breath, so we just can't do this.
Full disclosure, I do not have I don't have a formula for that. I tend to look at it, that one for me is much more individual, particularly in a world where there are things like orcs and warforged and owlbears and things with thicker density. Is an owlbear subject to the same kind of air problems that a human is? Maybe it's a giant, fuzzy, feathery barrel. Is a barrel subject to the same kind of air pressure that, let's assume the barrel is made out of wood, that a wooden cup is? Probably not. There's a lot more wood in the other thing.
True.
I don't know. I feel like once with altitude, if your players start to look at you funny when you say there's no problems, change your mind. Right? Like when they assume, when everyone at the table except you assumes that somebody should be breathing heavy by now, people should be breathing heavy now. Just adapt.
Fair enough.
Because never mind what's true. What your players expect to be true is a powerful weapon and a powerful thing you should pay attention to. It's not something you have to keep to, but it's something you should be aware of.
True, and you bring up a very good point. Is that sometimes when you're planning your adventure and you put in anything like this, they're going to go on go to a mountain, or they're going to go to an impossibly high tower. You know, if you're a fan of Dragon Ball Z, how Goku can breathe at the top of Kirin's tower is
ridiculous, right? But
there's no air there. There's no air there. But either way, that's not the point. So,
would you believe that actually Korin's tower is the interdimensional gateway to Kami's lookout, which is not exactly on Earth, even though it's physically attached to it?
Fair enough.
So in theory, the physics are anyway. Like, I'm kind of a DBZ nerd.
I assumed you were, but we've never actually talked about that. That's a good thing.
I'm a big nerd. One of these days, I'll have to just tear that show apart, specifically on the subject of the Dragon Balls. They're so incredibly inconsistent, it bothers me. It bothers me so much.
They're a plot convenience. Here's the thing. If ever you've been playing D&D for a while, D&D actually has a solution for this built into the universe it handles, which if you ever played a campaign setting called Spelljammer, which there's no 5th edition for it, but you can go back to the 7th edition. Yep. I do hope so, because I have some really good ideas for that. But either way, so they actually explain in the Spelljammer campaign setting that the physics of the universe of D&D are not the same as the physics of the known world. And they will tell you no matter how high you go, the air pressure is the same and gravity is the same. But once you breach the gravity bubble, there is no gravity. So that means that gravity does not diminish. It either is there or it is not. And one of the things that we were talking about, or we were messaging back and forth, is it depends on the universe. So this is one of those pieces of world building that is 100% non-determined by the system. You could be playing D&D, you could be playing Call of Cthulhu, you could be playing anything, and the universe, the system doesn't determine what happens. It's the universe that you believe in, the setting that you're in that determines, well, what happens in these situations. And that is one of the things that kind of I invite people to look into. You don't have to only use the system you're currently using, even though you're officially running that system. What do I mean? Can I assume, Jay, that when you're running a D&D game, you don't always use the D&D rules? You'll import like, oh, well, this situation was handled differently in Cortex, or this situation and you just, you know what? Let's use that method.
So yes, one of my favorite mechanics, one of my favorite times to pull in a mechanic from something else is when it's situational specific. Like Blades in the Dark is a fantastic, a brilliant stealth mechanical system. However, it is specifically designed to handle that one thing, which means if you want to do Blades in the Dark, and for some reason you didn't want to play somebody that specialized in some flavor of skullduggery, and you wanted to be, I don't know, a holy knight who was going to save the princess from the tallest tower from the biggest dragon ever, because you're going to do classic fantasy, just rudimentary, brand new people at the table. They eat that stuff up. I swear, I don't understand it. If you want to do something like that, then Blades in the Dark, if you're one of those people that subscribes to that system informs play, then it's probably not the right one for you. But there, what is, I call it the I know a guy clause, is really great stuff. You ever picture this?
I've heard about that one, but I've never applied it.
Your players are planning a heist because at some point that's going to happen. There's going to be a big shiny thingy and they want it and they can't have it because there's a wall, a dragon, 1,000 armed men with blasters, whatever. There's something between them and it that's a major problem. So they're going to pull an Ocean's 11 because somebody watched that movie recently and decides that that's how they want to handle it. Now, what's going to happen is your players are probably going to do a lot of planning and a lot of talking and a lot of thinking and maybe some drawing. And the heist is never actually going to happen because the prep step is boring. That's how come they montage through it in, say, Ocean's 11. They go from let's do it to we're doing it. Like we're walking in the casino right now, step one. In like 5 minutes, there's a bunch of montage stuff, maps on the board, people are pointing. George Clooney's going, bad plan, right? And they redraw it. But I mean, that's it. You didn't get to see that in real time. So instead of having you deal with all of that, Blades in the Dark says, I forget if you get points for this or if you can just do it. I forget what the caveat is and how many times.
But there's a mechanic for it.
Right. The mechanic is you encounter a problem on the heist. One of your players goes, I know a guy. and we flash back. They explain how they planned ahead for this specific problem, and we flash back to the present. That's it.
Huh.
Now, this sounds like I can hear some of you right now going, well, that means your players won't have any challenges on heist. That's not true, because there's dice involved. And who cares as long as they have a blast, and they will. So I thought that was a really cool idea, and I call it the I know a guy clause. And you can do that as many times as you want, and you just go, wait, I know a guy. We need a rare gem. I know where to get one. Rather, I know somebody who does. But I'm also going to hand you agency on that and say, who are they? When was the last time you saw them? And most of the time, players, because essentially they're afraid to take the power, will not say, I saw him yesterday. He lives in this town. I have yet to have that happen. Instead, it was like, last time I saw him, he was in the village to the north. Well, great. I gave you the agency, and you gave me just enough to throw him in prison. You'll have to break him out first.
Well, you're in a year, so I don't know. He might.
Who knows what happened in a year?
Well, we're not pen pals. Now, that actually
Right.
brings up something important. And I think that it's something that as a dungeon master, I've not done a good job. So much so that I dedicated the last 2 weeks in creating a tool for myself for this, but that is keeping track of NPCs, particularly and especially NPCs I didn't create.
Okay.
If I know a guy and my player says, I know a guy, well, that guy is in the world now.
Right, right.
And I am going to roll with that 100%. I agree. That is a fantastic method.
Hey,
But-
thanks.
But in the rest of this, like, well, I already have my NPCs and my major characters, and now I have a new person, and I need to integrate how that person's going to interact with the party. So the $1 million question is, well, yeah, well, they gave me enough rope to, strangle the new character in jail with, because they gave me the rope, and then what I do with it's my deal. But then, how do you make it so that I know a guy is relevant enough that you can bring that back? Do you keep track of your players' NPCs? And it comes down to a lot of note taking for a DM.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, not that much. If your players, when you hand them the ball that says, hey, I know a guy, when they go, I know a guy, his name is One-Eyed Jack. We pulled a heist together once. Last time I saw him, he was running from cops in the West. Okay, sure. Or something more specific. I know a guy named One-Eyed Jack. Last time I saw him was 3 months ago. We pulled off a heist. We stole Princess Ada's dowry. Her father, we got caught. Father sent the prison guards after us. I ditched him. Last time I saw him, he was running down an alley being chased by them. They're probably, they were 15 feet. He was probably going to stab him, and I ditched him. Those two situations, well, the one is much more informative. It's much more specific. It introduces multiple NPCs with names.
Mm-hmm.
What's important hasn't changed. Because your character said, I know a guy for a specific reason. Remember, couple that, like, hey, you guys need a jewel thief. You'll need like an expert in order to crack that super safe.
Sure.
And he goes, I know a guy, One-Eyed Jack. Great. What's important hasn't changed. What's important is that One-Eyed Jack is a jewel thief created by the player. That other stuff is only momentarily important. And it's not necessarily important. Just because he saw him run down the alleyway a couple months ago, doesn't mean that he didn't escape. And One-Eyed Jack isn't about to crash to the upstairs window and land where they are. Between when the player finishes talking and how the rest of the scene plays out, you have time to decide what you want to use. You don't necessarily have to use what they gave you wholesale. And if the player character, if the player suggested Princess Ada, dowry, dad, guards, kingdom, blah, 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 and you only use 10% of it, what it looks like to the player is you only use 10% of it right now.
Okay.
The only time you screw them over is when they said, hey, whatever happened to Princess Ada, and you say, ain't no princess named Ada. Now you've deliberately taken the information and thrown it out.
I see.
So,
okay. Fair
right.
enough. And again, that comes down to a lot of note taking on the part of the DM. So
there is that. Yeah.
I'm gonna go out of frame for a moment because I didn't know I was gonna show you this today. But let me go get my handy dandy. You've seen this before. It's my all-incapacitating binder of DM miscellany stuff, which gets thicker and thicker by the week.
Tell me about it. One of my favorite systems. I learned something about its new update that I didn't know, which is to say, I now know the final resting state of it. So I need to print off the rest of it and put it in this book.
I print as little as possible, but there's some things. I'm very tactile still. I still like the old school, having your character sheet. And for you guys that are watching us, you don't know this, but I'm currently playing in a game with Jay, who's DMing fantastically. I am the only one playing who actually has a physical character sheet instead of using D&D Beyond or otherwise. I roll my dice with physical dice.
So not that long ago, I bought this. I bought the PDF too, right? But I bought this as soon as I opened the PDF and got to the map, which is the first thing that, not even an introduction page, the first thing you look at that has picture on it is the map. I was like, I'm buying it because no map looks as good as in a PDF. I want the pages, man.
So here's what I've done, and I was actually been thinking about that. I know a guy mechanic, and so in my binder that's categorized, I have for sure. I have non-player characters, and I have, of course, a sheet of names that you cross off. And here's the thing: I looked through the internet, and I came up with this. I made most of this, and it is a blank sheet with a picture of a NPC, a space to fill the name. If you need stats, there's a place for it. And this I got from the Vampire, World of Darkness. And all it says is relationships, who, the concept, and what the relationship is. And this NPC, what his goals are, and the lore about him. It is blank. And I have exactly same thing with a different picture. Same thing, and I just, these are pictures I got off the internet, so I can't, even though I would love to put this in the link down below, and I don't have the rights to profit from this because but I know a guy, perfect. I get a couple of these ones that already have a picture. Which of these guys do you know? And what's his name? Oh, and who do you know? Who is no? And so
that's very cool.
And then they can just put in like, oh, okay, yeah, this looks like the girl that I know. Yeah, her name is this, and they can fill it out, and then can create their NPCs right there on the spot, and then I'll always have them as a reference.
That's
and
very
then
cool.
And then I can expand upon, well, these are their stats, these are their goals, this is their lore, and forevermore they are part of the campaign.
See, I tend to do that the other way, a different way. Like, so sometimes you'll have at the table, you'll have players of different experience levels, and more particular to this specific question, different confidence levels.
Sure.
So my friend, let's call him Jonas, is incredibly confident. He talks in full voice all the time. He's been playing since like 1981. He's big and boisterous and can play everything from a wild western cud chewing ass whooping guy with a carbine to a mage who goes what right. He does all kinds of things. So when he does I know a guy, he'll say, I know Jonathan Ironside. He's a mighty smith. He lives, and he'll give me what amounts to if I had to type it up, it would take me multiple minutes to do so.
Sure.
And then we have another guy. Let's call him Weasel the Second. Weasel the Second will go. Yeah, I know a guy. His name is John, and he owes me a favor. Well, here's the thing. They've both told me all that matters to them. Second person only cares that he has an NPC who owes him one. That's it. That's all he cares about. And I know that because that's all he said.
True.
Because if players will start with the thing that they care about. It's the same reason when we sit down in the next week, I'm going to ask one of you what happened last week, because you're going to tell me what you think is important because it's what you remember.
In my case, and again, I think I'm the only one in that campaign doing this. It's what my notes, what I thought was important enough to take notes about, which is.
But that's the same thing. You just wrote it down first.
It's exactly the same thing. Now, I do want to touch on one thing that most RPG systems will have at least a small blurb about these things. So, for those of you who are running 5e and want to stick to it strictly, which is fine too.
It's fine. It's fine. It makes my skin crawl, but technically it's fine.
Page 109 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I looked this up before our meeting day.
Of course you did.
We'll go over wilderness survival, and one of the blurbs it does have is precisely about high altitude. It's right there.
Oh, fun.
And it says, and which, by the way, this text here contradicts what's said in Spelljammer.
Of course it does.
But it does say that traveling at altitudes of 10,000 feet or higher is when this starts having a bit of a problem. And each hour a creature spends traveling at that altitude counts as 2 hours for the purpose of determining how long the creature can travel. Of course, this chapter has to do with wilderness and movement. So the only thing it really says is, if you're going that high, you're just restricted in movement. The thing is that you just don't have enough breath to go as fast as you normally do. And I do believe, and for simplicity's sake, this is a great little blurb that'll say, you know what, it's not important enough for you to worry about. If they get in a fight, they'll be fine at this height or any other. Unless you want to deliberately make it a puzzle, which is kind of what we went back to, then come up with a puzzle. It'll let you do it.
If a real world number will help, Mount Everest is just under 30,000 feet, which is 3 times the number you just rattled off, give or take. But I really do believe, much with many questions on the list, that I feel like we wandered away from for a minute, and I'm okay with that.
Which is fine. We complete tangent on that one.
Right, that they matter when they matter. Like, no one ever thinks about the problems and hazards of wearing metal armor unless somebody's got heat metal or a magnet, or a rust monster.
Magnet. You know what? I have never deployed a magnet in my games. I should definitely do that.
Now be careful with that, because once you deploy magnetism, you're going to have players maybe you have a fussy engineer at your table who knows that not all metals are magnetic, and he's going to call you on your shit. So be ready to deal with that.
True.
Tin, for example, is not.
To which I would reply, this is a magical magnet. It doesn't rely on magnetism. It relies on magic.
Nice. A wizard did it. A wizard and an engineer did it. A wizard who is an engineer. You're screwed now. Magic Tony Stark did it. You're a host.
Just because we were going in this one as well, it will also have, so again, if you are interested in running D&D 5e in particular, with rules as written, I do find that the Dungeon Master's Guide is a very neglected book.
As much as I have problems with Wizards of the Coast in general, and 5e within that bracket, I would totally agree with you there. The DMG has a lot to love in it. And it is, if there was one 5e book I would counsel regularly that was made by Wizards of the Coast, as opposed to a supplement that suggests you use 5e with it, like the Grim Hollow book I held up earlier.
Sure.
If we're talking about a Wizards of the Coast 5e book that probably everybody who plays 5e owns, the DMG is a really useful asset with lots going on in it. Optional mechanics you might use, magic items, lots of classics, and a couple of new ones. And just a lot of their how to GM section is much better than previous editions handled. Sure. But it's still not my favorite, but if you haven't read it, it's worth reading.
Now, I'm going to retouch on something that we did about the water. It doesn't come down with water pressure on this one, but on page 110, it will tell you how to handle frigid water. Is it super cold? Well, in that case, there's a difficulty 10 Constitution save you're going to have to go through it. Now, I'm not going to spoil this for you, all you DMs out there. Pull out your DMG, go to the page 110, and read the frigid water section. It is really short. It's 5 sentences, but it will tell you exactly how to handle that one.
That's good stuff.
And that's the thing. Sometimes on the fly, your players will say, well, we go into frigid water, and you never expect them to jump in, and now you have to solve what happens there. Open the DMG. It's actually right there. So
there might be something in there. Right.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely, for sure. And that's the whole point of these books. That any book that you buy for any game, it's just a reference. Right. Now, a reference book is only as good as how well you know what's in there.
Right.
You might not know what it says about it, but if you know the answers in there,
the book that will teach you vocabulary is no good if you don't actually read it. Right.
True. Or if you have a book on, math and you don't know that it also has a section on calculus, you might be stuck looking for the answer for those things.
Right.
Same thing here. If you don't know that it contains it, you're never going to consult it. It does contain it, by the way.
Somebody asked me earlier how I would handle exhaustion, not just from lack of sleep, but I didn't get enough water. I didn't get enough food. How do you mechanically handle that? Usually I handle that by not so much making there be a repercussion, though we might get to that if the players, I don't start there. I start with, well, why is water consumption all of a sudden an issue when I was assuming you had enough of it before? Is it because you've wandered into the realm of Dark Sun or Al-Qadim where the thing is an enormous desert? Well, okay, fine. Let's assume that you still, every time you go to market, can get clean water. You just need more of it. And because the people who live there, I mean, they're aware of their situation, right? So water costs more than it does other places. But that ties into how I tend to handle upkeep. So in older editions of D&D, fighters, each class had a specific, how do we say this, social bracket to which they were accustomed to living.
Sure.
That went up, not down. As a fighter becomes more fighty, more successful, he wants bigger, sharper weapons, and he wants better armor. And if you're playing an old school, kind of gritty, kind of Conan-y table, he probably wants more exclusive wenches at the bar, right? If we're going to play like that, you still want internal consistency. The rogue doesn't want to deal with Joe Schmo, bottom of the Thieves Guild. I mean, maybe when he's level 1. When he's level 8, no. He talks to the guy up there, the guy who doesn't talk to people who are level 1. But that kind of palm greasing is more expensive than wet behind the ears new guy, right? So the idea is that we can role play that stuff out, and I'm going to want to, but it's also going to cost money, depending on what it is. Clerics are going to put more money in the offering plate because it's harder to gain bigger favors with your god when you already got all the little ones. That sort of thing. So I just go, okay, here's what your level is. Come up with a formula. Your level in gold a month. Your level in gold times 4 a month. Whatever. And then we scrape that off at the end of every in-game month, and we assume then if you had the gold or whatever the currency you're working in, maybe it's, I don't know, goblin ears, whatever. We scrape off the amount of currency you're running on. If you can do that, once we've done it, we assume that you have your weapons are sharp and your bedroll is clean and whatever else it is that your character cares about situated for the next, however, just like paying bills at the end of the month out here in reality land.
Yeah, you don't pay them every day. You pay them at the end, for sure.
Right, you pay them at the end. But if you then head to a place where 2 gallons of water a day is something you have to have because the temperature is that hot and stuff's that dry, and all of a sudden the townies aren't giving it away, it's a silver piece for 2 gallons of gold, 2 gallons of water. Well, how many of you are in the team? Now that's a separate expense, what amounts to what I like to call bean counting. But now it matters because if you don't have it, bad things are going to happen.
True. Now, here's the thing, and this is why I was stressing this at the beginning, because if you set it up as part of a challenge, then it makes sense.
Agreed.
But if you set it up as bean counting, then it just bogs down the game,
right?
Which is a very different thing. So your approach is very much like mine. I do keep, and this is another thing that we differ on, I keep a calendar in my campaign. I keep a calendar and I keep time, as in you can't just fight once, long rest, fight again, long rest. You can't.
Because your body just won't go to sleep, right?
It just won't. So you have 6 hours to kill. What are you going to do with those 6 hours or those 12 hours or otherwise? Because sometimes, most of my players, by the way, I don't know why, they wake up 7 in the morning, well, in game, of course.
Right.
They go straight to a fight at 7:15. They're like, oh, I'm done for the day. Dude, it's not even 7:30.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like, no.
Right.
So one of those things is if you set it up as a challenge, like, okay, you need to cross this distance. This is a desert. This is the distance. This is how long it takes you to cross, which, by the way, there's guides for that in the DMG. And since it's a desert, you also need this much water. But you can only start with this much water because you don't have a horse, which means that you're going to have to find water at certain steps of the way. And if not, something bad's going to happen. Are you going to die? Probably not, because what's the point? This is going to be a skill challenge or something that we're going to resolve in less than 20 minutes. We're not going to role play every step of the way during the 4 hours that we're playing. But it does become a challenge. So like, okay, this is the challenge. And here's the thing, I don't know my player's stats. I don't. So I don't know what spells they have. I don't know what equipment they have. I don't know anything like that. I trust that they will keep track of that. So if I set up a challenge that I think is challenging, and they're like, oh, well, actually, I have this spell that I can use every 12 hours, so we're going to do it this and this and this, and they solve it in 5 minutes, they solved it. That's it. They went through their challenge. But these things only matter if you're setting up a challenge. You're never really bogging them down with them during normal gameplay. You go from this city to this city. All right, it took you 1d4 days to get there. Cool. Just mark down your cost of living for 4 days. That's it.
Right.
You know what I
mean? The guy who requested this specifically asked about arrows and acid problems and that sort of thing. I think in this case the puzzle avenue works very well. Why do arrows matter? Because you agreed it was going to be a bean county kind of super gritty realistic setting at session 0. If you did that, you already know. You already know how to handle this. You have your players track their stuff. If you had to talk them into that, you probably shouldn't have done it. Right?
For sure.
But if they're like, no, I want to do it like we used to do it. One guy's the mapper, one guy's the caller. I scratch my arrows off the sheet as I use them up. Then you don't actually have any extra work. They do, and they agreed to take it. If that's going to be fun, you'll probably know because they wanted that. And there are players like that. I'm not one of them, but they do exist.
There definitely are, and especially when it comes down to the use of magic items. That's right. Very much a thing.
In a situation where that isn't the case, and all of a sudden arrows, like say you're headed into a cavern that's covered in acid. I'm reminded of the caustic caverns from Borderlands 2. They drip acid all over the place. You're in an underground, it's a cavern. It's a cavern built in an old mining settlement, but it's a cavern there, which means there's acid up there. There's acid over here. There's acid coming out of the creatures. There's these big welts in the ground that just pop and spray acid when you get close to them. There's giant lakes of acid that the bad guys pop out of, obviously, right? It's, of course, right? In that location, Borderlands doesn't account for environmental damage beyond a certain point. Step in lava, take damage per second, and die. Acid works the same way. Fire works the same way. Fall off a cliff into like an insta-death Mario pit zone and die, right? But that's basically all there is to it. If you were playing D&D and you're a rogue or, mechanically speaking anyway, a ranger, and you're in this place because you're hunting, I don't know, the rare and elusive acid-spitting evil llama of Orcus, then I gotta
write that one down.
See, that's not in the book, but he is an absolutely terrifying llama, right? It's got 2 butts and one shoots acid and one shoots fire. It's terrifying. Now, if you're
pursuing this llama,
of course you're pursuing the llama, right? Because you're a mighty hero, and no 2-butted llama is going to get the better of you, right? So you go off into the acid cave to get it. Does it matter that all of your stuff is acidically threatened? Maybe that's part of the puzzle. For me, I would just look at it like this. You, and I would tell you up front, if it's a cavern that has so much acid in it, the cave drips with it. A cave drips with acid. Chances it's like it's a sponge or something. Chances are you can tell before you get into the cavern, before you pass the line of no return. So you have no reason not to tell your players up front, like, hey, the acid's a problem, right? And give them time to come up with a solution, unless you're really pushing them, and then don't give them time. Have something attack them when they get near the mouth, and have them have that thing be deliberately threatening enough that the best option that immediately appears is to go in the cave rather than deal with it. But if you're not doing something like that, give them time to figure it out. And be like, hey, look, if you don't figure it out, here's the consequence. Every other turn, I'm going to roll. You're going to roll. Every chance you can hand die to your players, do that. have
For sure.
them roll. If you don't beat a DC 10 hardness check, let's call it, some of your stuff melts, right? Like
Yeah.
just have, but I as much as I don't always look at everything the same way you do, I very much appreciate that you're like, be upfront about it, right? Because there's you can get away with an awful lot if your players don't feel like you cheated them. And a really easy way to not cheat them, well, I mean, for them to feel like you didn't cheat them, is to be upfront about what this mini game or puzzle is, what the stakes are, what happens, what it takes to win, and what happens if you lose.
Absolutely correct. Now, here's a thing that any starting dungeon master, and even some experienced dungeon masters, you might want me to hear this, is that there is no way you can talk about absolutely everything in session 0. Because there are things that are going to come up during play that you didn't even know were in your world. It came up and you kind of had to follow a thread that your players went down on and otherwise, and you didn't know there were acid caves in your world until, an acid cave came up because of something happened. And an ominous wind is stopping the acid from splashing out of the cave, but other than that, the cave is full of acid. Fine.
Right.
There's no way you can tell them, hey, if we ever stumble upon an acid cave, this is how we're going to handle it. If we ever go above this many feet, this is how we're going to. There's no way session 0 will include all of those things.
Right. So, there's no way.
Yeah. So don't. And this is just for new DMs out there. Don't feel like you have to touch on these things all the time. What you do have to touch on is like, hey, whenever we have something we haven't encountered before, I'll let you know how that's going to work before you get into it, and then you decide how to handle it. Because otherwise, you are forcing them into a no-win situation, which is never fun.
Right.
It's no win because they don't know, it's new for them, and they don't read your mind. They don't know how you're going to resolve the acid pit unless you told them, hey, there's going to be acid pits, this is how those are resolved, and here's the map. That makes sense? So
I agree with you.
Yeah, definitely don't put that much pressure on yourself as a DM on session 0. Just let them know that they also can say, I don't like how that's handled. Before we get too sidelined, because again, this will happen to us every time, there's one question that I do find super interesting I want to touch on, is that how about combat stamina? Now, the assumption in 5e, for example, which is what we start on, is that you'll have anywhere between 4 and 6 encounters during a given in-game day, which assumes that you can fight for at least 6 bouts of 2 or 3 minutes in a day without becoming exhausted. That is the assumption in D&D 5e. But the question is, what about, mind and body fatigue? Maybe your body can fight 6 times in a day, but shell shock is a thing. At least now it's called PTSD. But comes a point in which if you as a human being just see buckets and buckets of blood one day, because that's what that's what a day in the life of Conan is. Well, on the 5th day, you are done with buckets. You just don't have the will to go through it. Now, here's the thing, and as usual, very underrated book, the DMG. The DMG actually has rules for starting to lose your willpower. I know, it's a new one. Now, you notated that you, like me, are a big fan of the storyteller system, which is White Wolf. And they had willpower points. This is part of your character sheet, actually.
Right.
And the thing that I would say, and this is, Jay, correct me if you, or actually just, let me know if you handle it differently, is if you want to import the willpower point system into your D&D game, go for it.
Do it.
Yeah.
Do it.
Absolutely.
I'm a big fan of incorporating whatever you want, however you want, and taking stuff out. A friend of mine earlier asked, well, I shouldn't say that. We talk all the time. I don't know as if we're friends, but we butt heads politely on a fairly consistent basis. And he asked earlier, he had a question very much like this. He goes, hey, is there anything you've taken out or adapted from other tabletop games that specifically for your D&D table? And rather than bother him on Twitter, how I think all the systems are the same and everything is, nothing is D&D unless you say it's D&D, and everything is D&D unless you go out of your way to make it not D&D, because Dungeons and Dragons is a cooperative storytelling experience. It's like Whose Line It Is Anyway, except it doesn't always have dice and it's not always funny. So
and the points don't matter.
They really don't. They really don't. They really don't. What matters is the experience, right? And not the experience points, just the experience. So anyway,
Agreed.
before I went into this giant tirade about system identity, instead, I said, "Oh yeah. Here is the list of things that we have modified and/or removed: classes, skills, race, initiative, attacks of opportunity, ability scores." That list is long. Like, and he came back to me and went, "What do you have left?" And I said, a table that is specifically designed for the players present at said table, which is to say, custom beats one size fit all every day, every time.
For sure. Now,
Like,
now here's the thing about that. I don't know if you've encountered this, but my first game that I ever ran as a DM for 5e was with a bunch of new players.
That happens.
And just one relatively experienced player, but he was super cool and did not fuss about rules or otherwise. He rolled with it because he was having fun, and we're all friends. We're all friends from our karate studio, so we've punched each other in the face before, and we've been fine with it. Literally punched each other in the face before. So it's that kind of group. So it turns out that none of us knew the full extent of any book. None of us had read the player's handbook cover to cover. For sure, none of us had read the DMG cover to cover. So we figured things out a little bit role playing. We just kind of role played a couple of things that we didn't know how to handle. And then as time went by, I discovered there are rules for those things. That's fine too. But I did remember my days of playing World of Darkness. And even though I played very little, I was one of those geeks that would go through the books cover to cover, and I loved them. The mechanics were exciting. I would imagine scenarios of play in my head, even though I didn't play more than, I believe, five sessions. But I knew those rules back and forth. So when it came a point, and this actually happened in that campaign, and that someone was starting to not, everyone wanted to go into the Orc Cavern. This guy didn't. I'm like, okay, you don't want to go into the Orc Cavern, and you feel like and I said, what's your constitution? I actually went for it. Roll that many d10s, and if you get more than, and I said this in terms of World of Darkness, if you get more than 5 successes, you have no adverse reaction. You can go away, and you won't, you're not betraying your team or anything like that. But I imported that mechanic in wholesale because I remembered it, not because it's in the rules. I remember I handled this way one time.
Oh yeah. Sometimes it's something you remembered. The 13th Age has a really cool mechanic in it called One Unique Thing, which is not designed to give you some sort of martial upgrade in combat. Rather, something that designed to generate quest and RP opportunities, like All Cats Like Me. All of them. Full stop. Right? Big ones, little ones. Maybe I can even sucker a Rakshasa better than I might otherwise be able to, because it sort of kind of looks like a cat. Is it feline enough for that? Don't know. That's going to be a conversation. One of my favorites I've ever heard is all bread I bake is cursed. Like that's good stuff. What? That's fantastic. But the point is that 13th Age One Unique Thing is a really cool idea. That only 13 of the systems I'm familiar with, 13th Age is the only one that has that in the book, with a mechanical equivalent. This campaign setting by S. John Ross, which you should all go out and buy right now. He didn't pay me to say that. It's just that good. Has this fantastic section called To the Nth Degree. There are no mechanics in this book. None. There's not a single scrap of math in this entire book. It's a campaign setting, not an encyclopedia. But in it, which is to say there are no mechanics in it at all. But one of the suggestions is that you let your players get creative and have something that they are good at to the nth degree. Hulk is strong to the nth degree. He doesn't have an upper strength limit. No one is stronger than the Hulk, period. If somebody beats him in combat, they will not have done it with their sheer muscles. While there are more characters in Marvel Comics that are dwarf his power substantially, they do it because they're cosmic beings who can literally just, and he lost, right? What they're doing is controlling reality. Somebody's faster than him. Somebody has magic powers. Somebody's a god, whatever. But no one just punch for punch beats the Hulk, because he is strong to the nth degree. Don't be afraid to let your players do that. Have a thing that they are just the best at.
And I can totally vouch that is a great, by the way, for those of you watching, that is the campaign setting that we're currently playing in, which is DMing. And it took me a while to wrap my head around that answer. My character can create jewelry to perfection that is like none other in the world. That's what he does to the nth degree. Does it help in the story? Absolutely not. Well,
Not
does
yet.
it help in combat?
Not yet. Oh, I got plans.
Does it help in combat? Absolutely not. At least not yet, but either way. So one of the things that I want just to come back on this question, combat stamina.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that I find with stamina is that 5e assumes that you have the strength to do the things that you do unless you meet the conditions of exhaustion. However, the one that I have found most useful, page 159 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, and this is your fault, by the way. You gave me time to research this. I normally would not pull out books. This is your fault.
You're welcome.
We'll have an option for going mad. D&D 5e actually has madness rules. They're optional, of course. And what I have found is that if my players go through a lot of combat, my players might find that fun and interesting, but I will say, hey, your characters are getting blood sick, as in they are done with blood. So the next time you have an encounter and you turn it into a combat encounter, you might start going crazy. And my players, one of them was like, that makes no sense. To which I replied, well, neither does magic. But I'm just saying, murder hobos, there's some consequences for murder hoboing in my universe. Maybe the guards can't touch you, but you're going to start to go a little crazy. And so, which, by the way, highly recommend that, not because I disencourage murder hobos. You want to be murder hobo? Go for it. It's just because I found it interesting. And now the players I play with on Monday, they love this mechanic. They are in love with, like, yeah, well, I mean, we could kill these creatures, but we're going to start to lose our minds. No, let's try to talk to these orcs that want to kill us, which is the opposite effect. Which I'm thinking is, that's a little crazy already. They're attacking you, and you want to talk to them. That's already a bit nuts. Anyway.
So ICRPG, also a big fan, has this fantastic table for insanity. It has a list of events, right, and how much essentially sanity damage that you take. It tells you how many you start with, which is 1 heart or 10 hit points worth of sanity, because Hank Overnight Runehammer is a Zelda nut, and he lifted the heart full sail for your hit points. See somebody dismembered, beheaded, or die terribly, you just take a point of sanity damage. And it's not the kind of thing you decide with your players whether or not they get to roll to resist it or not. Maybe they can, maybe they can't, but once you agree as a group, that's it. That's internal consistency for you. Don't move the goalpost without talking to them first. Revisions to sports and their rules happen, but not instantly in the middle of a game, right? You sit down, you talk about it, usually for a really long time before the rules get changed, because sports nuts be sports nuts, and they don't just change their shit overnight. For sure. And tabletop nerds are really no different. People get real fussy about the games they like and the mechanics they like, and that's okay. And some of them so that's just 1 point. Maybe you get a save, maybe you don't, but you lose a point. Or something a little more flexible, like witness the arrival of an elder god, such as Cthulhu. Roll a d6, you take that much. And there's a little chart below that keeps track of how many you hit. Like, for each pip of sanity that you have, here's what your everyday is like. 10, safe in the veil of daily normalcy. When you only have 5 left, pure white hot terror, you break a cold sweat. All of your rolls are hard, which is ICRPG's equivalent of all of your rolls have disadvantage. Whether or not that's permanent or not is, again, something you should agree on as a group and then stick with it. That doesn't mean it can never, ever change. Obviously, there are feats and outstanding circumstances. But once you've agreed to an internal consistency, if it changes, there should be a reason that everybody is aware of, unless you're deliberately withholding it and you're going to tell them at some point, like in a mystery movie. If you don't want your players to feel cheated, the truth you hid has to be worth the wait and the secret. The truth has to be worth the lie.
Right.
It has to be.
The truth can't just be these two NPCs that are irrelevant happen to be twins.
Right. I mean, you can if that's really going to blow your player's mind. But we've probably all heard of twins. You probably got to try harder than that. The first Scream movie does a fantastic job because the viewer believes there will be one killer. There are two. The Legacy of
spoiler for a very old movie. But
sorry. Legacy of Kain Defiance has a fantastic trip of expectations because one of the main characters is led to believe that he is one of two holy champions. He is both. And the player, at least I was like, because the two holy champions are champions from two factions that hate each other's guts. The idea that one person could be both just doesn't, it's not something you're going to think of until you're like, whoa, crap, right about the same time he does, which is how come it works really well. So if you're going to move the truth around, you're probably going to put something in the place of it, which is to say a lie. The truth has to be worth the lie in order for your players to not feel cheated. On this chart, once you get to 0, you're not dead. You're just nuts. You're Redfield at the end of Dracula. You're in the van going forever.
eating the fly for sure.
Right. Confident that you'll become more powerful if you eat enough bugs. Right.
Well, I mean, they are protein. That's not entirely untrue, but I don't think that's exactly what that meant.
Yeah, but he's not going to get hemomantic powers.
If only. I would eat so much bugs. I would eat so many bugs.
But I would not. I'm good.
Well, I got to tell you, this has nothing to do with D&D, but when I got married, one of the traditional things you eat in Mexico is grasshoppers. It's delicious if you like them, and one of the things we served were grasshopper bites for our guests. They love them. So I'm just saying, bugs, not that bad.
Are they? I have so many questions. Are they crunchy?
It depends on how you prepare them. If you toast them, yes. If they are just dipped in oil and with some chili pepper, they're not crunchy.
In both situations, are they dead?
Before you even start cooking them, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
just so you know. Now I feel like I would be totally willing to eat a crunchy one, but a soft one throws me off. I don't know why.
You don't really know until you try them, and
I bet.
This is just one of those things that is a cultural thing. Some people think that bugs are disgusting. Other people don't. I
put ketchup on my mac and cheese, and I meet people who look at me like I'm some kind of psycho.
I have a cousin. No. Here's the thing. I have a cousin, and I kid you not, he puts ketchup into his orange juice in the morning.
That's different.
And he loves it. That's it.
Oh.
That's all I can say. That's fine. I have not had the stomach to try that. And whereas I will eat bugs.
Right. Like whereas I will eat bugs. Nice.
One thing I was going to mention that I think we just skimmed over a bit is that the truth of the matter is that you don't have to. Things don't have to be realistic.
You don't.
As long as they're consistent, and you can tell your players, this is how this is handled. We're going to come up with this way. Go for it. If you don't know, if you have no clue how to handle these things, really do go through the DMG. It does give you a couple ideas.
It does have a lot to work with. It is easily. If somebody was going to press me to recommend a 5e book produced by Wizards of the Coast, my first reaction would be that I wouldn't. But if you were going to push me to do so, just one, I wouldn't recommend the PHB. I would which is not to say it's not worth reading. But if you only had $50 and you're only going to buy one book, the DMG is all you really need. Go with that. You don't even need that. But if you were going to buy one, that's the one I would recommend.
For sure.
Before some of my less, how do I say, vocabulary insistent friends watch this and go, what do you mean you don't need to be realistic? Realism and internal consistency are two different things. Realism means in reference to reality, which is to say the only reality you know, which is to say Earth. Superman is allergic to kryptonite. Full stop. He's allergic to a glowing green rock. It's a problem. He should see his doctor. He's allergic every time. So if Superman comes across a bright green piece of glowing kryptonite that the angles or whatever, I imagine there are other green rocks in the DCU and he can tell them apart. If he looks at one, if it's clearly kryptonite and he's not getting weak in the knees, There needs to be a reason. Kryptonite is not real. It doesn't exist here on Earth. So Kryptonite and Superman are inherently not realistic. They're not. But within the world they exist in, they are a constant. If tomorrow if Lois Lane is Superman tomorrow, I imagine she'd be Superwoman, wouldn't she? And there would need to be I want an explanation, right?
Thor is still Thor, even if it's a woman, so I don't know.
Right, because it's a title, not a name, right? If tomorrow Jimmy Olsen is Superman and Clark Kent is a mild-mannered railroad worker, then I want to know why, right? Like there needs to be a reason. And if there isn't an explanation, I'm going to be really irritated.
And you know what? This kind of comes back to the example of the video that Kyle was doing on the bag of holding. Mm-hmm. It is not realistic, even in the description that it has for the magical item. However, it is consistent. Every time you put someone in the bag of holding, they have 10 minutes, and that's it. It's because you can rely on that to solve your puzzles, and that's really the whole point of these things. Now, one that I did get, I saw, and I was a bit baffled at why this question came to us, mostly because the first time I asked this question, I consulted the books and had the answer is, what happens when you're walking and riding and going for a long trek? And how does this exhaustion work on that? And the funny thing is that the first time I ran my campaign, I was doing as I said, it was for new, we were all new, and I was running the starter set, which is the Lost Mines of Phandelver, mm-hmm. which, by the way, I do believe is if you're a new DM, start with that. It's actually good for starters. It'll get your feet wet pretty well. But mm-hmm. one of the things is, well, when they go from here to here, there's a table for random encounters, but it doesn't tell me how long it takes. In the adventure, it doesn't say it takes you this long to get from here to here. Or it doesn't tell you, well, what happens if they're on horses? What happens always? And so fortunately, at the time, I did have the player's handbook, and chapter 8, page 181, is literally on adventuring. And the first thing it comes up with is speed and travel pace. And at the bottom of page 181, it goes to forced march. Well, what happens when you're traveling at more than that page? And it will tell you that there's a difficulty 10 plus 1 for each hour past the 8th hour, that if you don't pass that, you get a level of exhaustion. So I integrated that into my game because it is literally what comes up right there. Well, what happens? You get exhausted, and it's right there in the book. So one of the questions that we got was walking and riding, vegetation, humidity, rain, fog, mist. That is all covered right there in chapter 8, which is adventuring. Now, that being said, and I cannot stress this enough, if you have found on the internet generally, just Googling it, a more fun method to handle this that you and your players enjoy, use it. There's nothing more than that. I believe, correct me if I'm mistaken, Jay, you're a much better historian than I am of these things, that the original D&D with the 3 little booklets would refer you to a separate game. Like, if you're going to do Overland, buy this game. This is how Overland works. They didn't even give you.
So I honestly don't recall. It's been a long time. But I agree with your sentiment that if there's a mechanic that I would step back, take a step further than if you have a rule system you like better that you found somewhere else. If there's a mechanic that you don't like, skip it. Like, look, everybody's here to have a good time. If something's in the way of that, I mean, maybe not if it's your kid, right? But if it's a mechanic, throw it away. It doesn't need to be there, particularly if it's being a pain in your butt. So Hoard of the Dragon Queen is the first published adventure that was released for 5th edition. Yeah. For those of you who haven't played with that, in the story of the adventure, you're hot on the trail of a dragon cult that you've tracked to Baldur's Gate. When you get there, you'll learn that the cult is actually somewhere else. They're headed to Waterdeep, and you're encouraged to join the caravan however you can. However, there's a little problem. The trip takes 40 days. 40 days.
40, people.
40. Now, when you get there, you'll discover that, behold, the information is wrong, and you're actually headed off to Neverwinter, which means that your reward for dealing with the mind-boggling that is 40 days of driving, hoofing it, whatever, your 40-day caravan trip, your reward is another caravan trip. I don't know about you, but I think that's absolutely unacceptable. That's absolutely unacceptable. If you drive from one place to another, if you drive, so at some point in the relative future, my wife and I are going to make a fairly lengthy trip across several states. Now, I love her, and I know one of the reasons I love her is because I can be in a small little box on wheels for hours at a time, and we can run out of music that we like to listen to, and we can both be tired. And you do that thing where you get out of the gas station and you stretch your legs for what feels like the first time ever. Just the car ride that is just too freaking long. And I will still want to touch her and love her and snuggle her. And that is our relationship, and our patience with each other is not affected so by the road trip that I'm like, yeah, let's never do that again. As soon as we're done, I'm like, I could be in the car with you again. Sure. Let me go pee first. We're good. But the trip itself is inherently boring. While it's true that we might run into a world's biggest yarn ball sign, or a building that's architecture is interesting, or we might stop off for dinner because I'm fat and I want to eat, right? Any number of things like that. Those things exist outside the road itself, which is to say the trip itself is boring because travel is inherently boring. That's how come they have random encounter tables. And in that particular supplement, that book's written like you're going to walk for the 40 days. Like you could just, but the book is written with the assumption that you are not going to do that. The crux of that book's opening, the thing that puts all the weight on the GM in the beginning anyway, is the 40-day hoofing it. You're going to want random tables, maybe. You're going to want to plan out a bunch of stuff, whatever, however you do it. I'm going to hand wave all that stuff because I wanna. I read a lot of Conan. One of those stories opens up. There's a ship crossing across the ocean, and a giant Cimmerian, who isn't actually called Conan by name until like halfway through the story, hurls himself up over the side of the ship, drips water and who knows what else onto the ship, marches up to the dude who he thinks looks the most important, and goes, "Where's the captain? I want to talk to him." And they go, "Blah, blah, 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 blah. Captain's not be disturbed." And he picks him off of the ground and shakes him till he pees, or whatever it is that Conan does, something physically intimidating, and asks again. And the guy goes and he gets the captain, and Conan says, "Hey, I'm big, I'm strong, and I listen. I want a job on the ship. I want to stay. I'll pull my weight, blah, blah, blah." And he goes, "Yeah, all right." And this story picks up from there. But how Conan got on the ship and where he came from is barely touched on. How he got here is kind of self-explanatory. And why he chooses to be here and not there is not actually described all that well, because it doesn't matter. It's outside the scope of this story. The story is not about where Conan was. It's about where he is.
Mm-hmm. That is very much like the backstory of your characters. There's a backstory to it, but you're not going to play through it. It informs what your character is at the point that you're starting the story you're telling.
Right. If you're playing through it, it's not backstory, it's now story, right? Correct. It's present story.
Correct. And travel is very much like that. Now, again, I handle things a little bit different than Jay. I actually will roll on the random encounter tables, and I do strongly believe in the full 24-hour adventuring day in the game, which means that, okay, we're going to have a couple of hours of adventuring. We're going to have, we're going to have 40 days of travel, which, by the way, I haven't run this module. I have it. It's sitting on it. I got it as a present, so it's sitting there. I'll run it one day. But if we're going to have 40 days of travel, I will tell you what happened in those 40 days, but I am not going to make you role play 40 days of travel. You know what I mean? So unless it's part of a puzzle, and again, well, maybe the puzzle is you are Conan, you do have to reach the ship. How are you going to do that? That's up to you. What happens if you fail is a different thing, but it's part of a puzzle. Then yeah, we're definitely going to put in exhaustion. We're going to put in distance. We're going to put in that sort of thing. And there's rules for it, by the way.
Right.
But the rules of these things, the rules of exhaustion, the rules of forced march on page 181 of the player's handbook, the rules about mounts and vehicles and speed, and how much your stealth gets penalized if you're going faster, how much it gets boosted if you're going slower. Those rules are there so that you can craft a puzzle, so that you can craft a way that it is active for the players to do something. But, and this is the important one, there have to be consequences for losing or not solving the puzzle. Otherwise, it's just busy work.
Right, exactly.
If they were going to get there anyway, under the same conditions, hand wave it. Absolutely just hand wave it. If, however, there might be an advantage when they get there because they solved the puzzle satisfactorily, then definitely go into the role play, open up your rule book, use that, craft that as an encounter.
Definitely. I'm reminded of the missions in the Spider-Man 2, the Sam Raimi adaptation video game. So in that there are main story missions that you have really no agency in. You have the agency on how you're going to seek your resolution, but what that resolution is has already been decided for you, which is to say you will beat Dr. Octopus or he will beat you. You will beat Scorpion or he will beat you. You will save these 6 people from the burning building in time or you will do the level over again, right? Like you don't have the agency to choose the goal, but you do have the agency to choose how you're going to go about it. Are you going to use a bunch of web attacks? Are you going to whip stuff at him? Are you going to get in there and punch him in the mouth a lot? You have Spider-Man in that game has a copious amount of attacks ranging from webs to projectiles to webs on his fists, punches, kicks, slow motion, max pain, bullet time stuff. You've got just a world of offensive and defensive options. More so than the more recent Spider-Man game on PS4, actually, which pains me to say because that game is awesome. However, Spider-Man 2 does trump it in sheer offensive capabilities, for sure. Don't get me wrong, there's no one's a better game, but the old one had some really great stuff going on it. But outside of individual story missions that will play out the same way every time, outside of how you choose to accomplish them, and often there's really only one foolproof way to pull it off, you have several different kinds of side missions. There are big green discs that will appeal over people's heads. And if you click on them, right, you'll have a mission to do. And if you do that, if it'll say, there are 4 people on a sinking ship, go get them to shore in the time limit. If you pass, or here's a guy hanging off a building, get him before he loses his grip, which is really the same thing. Save these 6 people from an object that you can't just run to in the time limit. Save that one guy that you can just run to in the time limit. This time limit's going to be a lot longer, you hope, because it's harder. Take the mission or don't. If you take the mission and you pass, hero points, which is that game's version of experience. If you take the mission and you fail, lose some. You have the agency to look at the guy with the green disc going, Spider-Man, I'm over here, and ignore him. If you choose to execute your agency, and you'll have to do some of those because of how the game's experience system works, but you can do an infinite number of them if you want. You have the agency to walk away from being a hero most of the time. If you choose to get involved, you're on the hook now, hero, right? Earn it. There are little pricky purple random encounters. The kid with the balloon, for those of you who played that, who are now going, yeah, you know the one I'm talking about. There's a gang war in the street. You don't have to get involved. You can actually swing right through that. There's guys shooting at each other in the street, and you know that because you swung by. If you get out of proximity or whatever, the game isn't going to penalize you. You just don't have to get involved. You don't. But since there's no negative, even once you've definitely got involved, like if you go to get that balloon and you pop it and the kid goes, you don't lose any points. But because there was no theoretical risk, there was really no risk of failure. The only thing you could have possibly expended was the time it took, your involvement in the level, which will be the same even if you pass. So your resource expenditure is going to be the same no matter what. And you only stand to gain, not lose. That means that because of that, probably, I mean, I didn't develop the game, but probably because of that, the total gain is less, about half than what you get from one of those green disc missions.
Of course.
And as much as that's a video game and not a tabletop experience, I think there's a great design choice in that.
And I you know what? I could not agree more. If all your players stand is to gain something, then absolutely, it is a no-brainer. Set up a little mini game or set up a challenge according to the travel rules or anything like that. But if they could lose something, then the prize better be worth it.
Right.
Better absolutely be worth it. Now, and one thing that I always do with my players, and again, I'm going to pull out my handy dandy Dungeon Master tools that I use. I have my magic items over here. I will tell them, these are the magic items on available, and then I'll swing over to, and I love this one, these are the mini games that you can play. And which, by the way, I highly encourage you to incorporate mini games into your games.
Oh, I'm a big fan.
Absolutely, it is one of the best things. But in my case, it's that, okay, if you only stand to win, the magic item are potions of healing, that sort of situation. If you could lose something, well, then the magic item might actually be a cloak of the arachnid, or it might be an immovable rod or something like that. So definitely so. Same thing with travel. There are rules for how exhaustion works. There are rules for acceleration. There are rules that one of the things they had is that what happens if there's vegetation, if it's difficult terrain, how does that handle overland travel? There are rules for that, and you can create a game out of it. You can create an encounter.
An easy answer for things like in difficult terrain is that you move slower. A lot of RTS games do it like that. Total War is famous for it. If you up a mountain or through the forest or through the swamp or whatever, you move it like half speed, unless you're a special kind of unit. Like, I don't know, what in 5e would be a ranger, right? Unless you have a specific kit or ability that makes you exempt from that, then terrain slows you down. Well, I still don't care unless slowing me down is a noticeable inconvenience, because I don't know, the village I love is on the other side of the swamp and it's currently under attack. The fact that I cannot get there right now matters. If it doesn't, then role play that they're up to their nipples in mud for longer than they like. Move on, you're at the village.
That's exactly right. So you can, if it's not part of a interactive experience, you can hand wave it and just role play it. But if there's a reason to spend time and roll dice on it, right, then go into the rules. And again,
we didn't cover all the questions, did we?
No, we did not. We are 2 paragraphs off of covering them all. But
okay, good.
I do believe we can do this one. So the last one that we put into this one is effects of altitude and falling from that altitude, Batch said.
Okay.
And here's the thing about that. And as long as you tell your players what those rules are beforehand, they can be anything. So in D&D 5e, which is again the example that I always by default use, mostly because it's the most popular game that everyone watching here has probably at least played once, there is a 1d6 for every 10 feet you fall, with a maximum I believe it's a maximum of 10d6 no matter how high you fall from.
Which is reasonably, while we're on the subject, realistic, because at a certain point you do not fall any faster.
Fantastically so. But here's the thing about it. The only time that has ever come into play has been in detriment of my monsters, because one of the sorcerers that I'm playing with, they just got to level 6. They levitate as one of their spells, and what they are doing now is that they are levitating people off cliffs. And for some people, for some DMs, they say, "Well, that's broken. They're just solving the puzzle that way anytime." Yeah, because that's the solution they have for it. And
right, they took levitate. They're executing their agency. Let them.
Sure. And so that the only time that that's coming to play is like, well, how high is this mountain? And here's the thing, I will make up on the spot with a confident voice how high that is.
Oh, of course.
And then my players will say, "Oh, okay, so it's gonna be 4d6s when it falls." Okay, and like I don't even have to say it anymore.
And while I can hear people now going, "Well, that's metagaming," maybe, but it's also a realistic understanding of the puzzle pieces they're working with. When you buy a puzzle from Walmart that says 300 pieces on the outside of the box, if you got home and there were 299 of them, you would be upset. Like, if there were 300, but one of them was this big and it obviously didn't actually like work for you, you would also be upset. Moving the goalpost is upset. If we were playing a football game and every time it was my turn to kick the ball, you had two big giant sons of guns come and move the goalpost around like this, I would be really upset with you, and I would be rightful to do so. So sometime that is outside the scope of this conversation, we should talk about metagaming.
Well, here's the thing.
Go ahead.
I don't think this is metagaming at all, because they didn't ask me how many dice is going to take in damage. They asked me, how high is this mountain? How high is it from this ledge to the next ledge? They didn't ask me how many dice they're going to roll. They told me if it's this high. And then just because they know the mechanics of the game, oh, okay, so whenever we resolve that the mechanics will come into play.
So while we're on the subject of using spells in creative fashions, somebody pitched this to me the other day, and I thought this was pretty great. Next time you're playing a 5e character and you're in the position to take haste, do so and cast it on the bad guys. Because choose a willing creature that you can see within range. No creature in its right mind that isn't really intelligent would deliberately turn down being hasted. Because haste makes your speed double, +2 to armor class, and it has advantage on dex saving throws. Oh, and it gains an additional action on each of its turns. Because of how 5e's action economy works, that is the best part of that spell, for sure.
For sure.
So what in its right mind, who didn't already know this tactic I'm about to throw at you exists and expected you to use it, would turn this down? That action can only be used to take the attack one weapon attack action, dash, disengage, hide, or use an object. But all of those actions are really cool and useful. This part's important. When the spell ends, the target can't move or take actions until after its next turn, as a wave of lethargy sweeps over it. If you cast a spell in D&D, in most cases, you can cancel it whenever you damn well want.
If it's a concentration spell, yes, that is correct.
Which means you go like this to the bad guy, haste, and then you go, just kidding. And he doesn't get his next turn.
You are correct. You know what? I'll allow it.
I sure would. I thought it was very creative. I sure would.
Absolutely. So before we close off on this one, the recap that I want to make sure that everyone gets is this: as long as the way you resolve these environmental factors is consistent, your players will find a way to work with it and find it enjoyable. If you are making hard rules that you change every time, that's when it's a problem.
Right.
If you're playing D&D 5e, I highly recommend that you take a look through the actual. This sounds stupid, but take a look through the books. Page 183, the environment. It goes through falling and suffocating. It will give you rules to handle that. If you go to the DMG, it will give you rules for cold water. It'll give you rules for extreme height. It'll give you rules for exhaustion. So the rules are there, and if you don't find them in a D&D book, look them up online. There are some resources that people just come up with, and most of the mini games that are 5e compatible, it just means that they use the same terms and the same dice. It doesn't mean that they actually integrate with the rules in any other significant way other than any that you like more. If you want to handle overland travel by pulling out a Catan board and playing Catan as part of your
that could be fun.
There you go.
That could be fun.
That is absolutely fine.
One of my favorite mini games is Dice Poker, and I straight up yanked that out of The Witcher.
There you go.
And
absolutely.
Fun. If you're playing D&D, you've probably got a fistful of D6s laying around. So it's
A D6s? Everyone has D6s, even if they don't play D&D.
Right, because it's the most common die on Earth, right? It's used on everything from Yahtzee to... Doesn't Monopoly have dice? No? I don't remember. Anyway,
yes, it does.
Okay.
You advance the dice. That's absolutely correct. So at least for closing remarks from me is, as long as you find a method that works for you, you can use the ones we mentioned here, which in my case, many of them are because of personal preference. Integrating the madness rule is something that has worked well with my tables, but because I do them consistently, and so my players now know that they might go a little bit crazy if they start attacking people willy-nilly. But if you don't want to do that one, find a mechanic that works for you. The ones we suggested today are not there's no one. The D&D police are not going to knock on your door like, hey, that is not D&D. You can't use that rule.
Right. Matt Mercer is not going to smash through your window and hit you with spitballs. Right. No, I mean, he might do that, but if he does it, it won't be because of that.
It's not because of the rules you're using. Absolutely not. So I don't know, Jay. I don't know if you have anything that you think we needed to touch on with regards to exhaustion and height and drowning and otherwise. And
mechanically speaking, exhaustion ranks in 5e are scary things. Scary things. Have a bad guy not deal damage. Have him if he hits you, you take one of those. That's terrifying.
You know right? What I did the one time.
Did you?
No, not the bad guy. So someone was trying to convince a king to do something that obviously wouldn't work.
Okay.
It's just that the king is never going to do it. There's no
right. Just a no
unless he's magically compelled.
Okay.
Because again, magic.
He just won't. Right? People have hard limits. Yeah.
Yeah. So all right, you want to convince him to do this? Fantastic. You are going to have to, give the best oratory. You're going to have to filibuster like if you were in Congress.
Nice.
And for each time you fail, you need this many successes. For each time you fail, you are taking a level of exhaustion and you are surrounded by guards. You want to give this a try? And they went for it.
Nice.
Until they fainted filibustering, in which they were captured, and now they're in the dungeon. And they didn't have to fight. The guards didn't have to subdue them. They were just exhausted.
And what's important for me here is that you told them what it would take to win and what it was going to take to lose. And more importantly, what would happen if they won and what would happen if they lost. All of that was very clear. And then you handed them the metaphorical die, or maybe some physical dice. I don't know.
There were rolls involved.
And they decided whether or not they wanted to take up that quest. And the wrinkle there is if they had if now that they know what the terms are, don't wiggle out of them, even if they fuck up. Honor their choice to take the risk by letting the hammer fall if it happens to fall.
The reason they fainted filibustering, which is what I called it, is because they were so deep into exhaustion already that they're like, if we start combat now, we're gonna die. We're better off just rolling a dice, see if we can convince them, because we're in way too deep already. And they were right. They were in way too deep because you're correct. The exhaustion rules in D&D 5e are freaking scary.
Have a bad guy go like that, like the shadow in 5e. That thing is way too low on the CR scale if you use that. Because that thing hits you and you take a D4's worth of strength damage. That's rough. What's your average? What's the hardiest guy got for a strength score? 20?
That's the limit.
That can go by pretty fast on a D4. You want something scarier than that? Have him hit for exhaustion levels. The point is that whatever rules you agree to, I don't really like the word rule. Whatever mechanics you agree to, they're not rules. They're not hard and fast framework. This is the way it is until you and your players agree to them. Mm-hmm. Once you've done that, though, and you should give your players some reality, some ground to stand on that they can feel safe and comfortable in. So they don't feel like you're moving the goalpost. Once you've agreed to a framework, whatever it happens to be, you can also agree to not agree. You can agree to wing it when you get there. But whatever you've agreed to, no matter how loosely defined or draconically defined that is, once you're there, stay there. Mm-hmm. And only make exceptions with some sort of explanation. Spider-Man is incredibly strong all the time, and he's Peter Parker all the time. If tomorrow he's Mary Jane, I want to know why, and I'm going to expect an explanation. If I would expect that of my comic book, which has a 75 years of backstory for me to go back and read if I want, I'm going to expect that of this world we're making together, because you have the agency here to be in on the ground floor of what could amount to 75 years of backstory. And unlike Marvel Comics that spent the first 15 years treating their comics as though they were birdcage lining and had no expectations for consistency or internal, no. The first 20 years of superhero comic books are wonderful to read, but make no sense, right? You don't have to do that. And you can if you want to. Tad Stones makes Darkwing Duck and believes that continuity is a cage. And
I
yes,
see the T-shirt you're wearing. By the way.
big fan. And he is of the belief that the concept of established lore or canon is silly. You don't need it, because once we agreed that Peter Parker is Peter Parker, we've also agreed that he can't be anyone else, and that's creatively limiting. And I love Tad to pieces, but I don't agree in a collaborative story, because
Correct.
everybody there wants to have some ground to stand on that feels safe and normal, because you can't have weird if you don't know what normal is.
Correct. Absolutely agreed. Yeah. So find the mechanics that are fun for you,
right,
and your group. Stick to them, and also feel free to change them if everyone agrees they didn't like them and didn't have fun with them. Find new ones.
Absolutely.
But stick to the ones you agree upon for the time that you've agreed upon them. That's pretty much how it goes. And do not neglect these books. I was surprised at some of the questions because they are explicitly answered in the 5e book. I'm like, but that's just, I know, I don't have these memorized, by the way. But as you can see, I have tabs on them because I know what's in them. So like, oh, I have a question about this one. It's on the,
so
that's that one.
Flip open the player's handbook. On the inside cover, there's where the acknowledgments and stuff page is. At the bottom of that, you're going to find a collection of fascinating text. And there's one of those in every one of those books. And I have friends who've owned some of those books since they originally came out who don't know that. I think it's the DMG has the one about how Wizards of the Coast is actually a bunch of mind flayers. No, it's not. We're just kidding. Don't read that. Right? Like it's fantastic stuff. Those are brilliant.
I'm not going to spoil it, but definitely you have them. It is right next to the cover art portion. They are fantastic little pieces of text.
They're so funny, and some people read these books for ages and just don't notice that stuff.
No, absolutely not. So go through the rules you already have. It's going to save you a lot of money if you at least try these first. If you like them, fantastic. If your group likes them, fantastic. If you don't like them, get other rules.
If money is an issue for you, or you don't want to carry around a bunch of books, the SRD, which is free, it's a website, covers, minus the art and a couple of exceptions, the vast majority of what's in those books. Not trying to talk Wizards out of money here, nothing like that. But I mean, those are $50 books. Maybe you just don't have the scratch for that, and that's okay.
True.
SRD is free. It's online, and it will cover, I'd wager, 95% of what Wizards has on offer, including everything that's in those two books, minus the art, because that's where most of the expense comes from.
Actually, yeah. So thank you guys for your time. Thank you guys for sticking with us till the end of this whole thing. I hope it was useful. I hope you didn't have to take down the pages that I referenced, but they're useful as well. Thank you, Jay, for putting this together. I know that it takes a little bit out of your day, and that you being the only professional dungeon master about the two of us, you could be playing a game right now and making some money. So thank you for putting that. Thank you for investing in all of us that really do. We do get a kick out of these things, and I hope everyone found something useful. Thank you for your time, guys. We will see you next time on our next topic.
Sounds good. Bye.